What is going on? It's your man Jay Immanuel back with a new season of Why We Succeed, season 3, and I'm kicking it off with somebody absolutely amazing, my girl L'areal Lipkins. What's going on with you?
Hey, by the way, congratulations on 3 seasons.
Thank you,
Most people
yo.
give up after one, right? So the
Right.
fact that you made it for three, congratulations. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh man, I appreciate it, and I'm so glad to have you kicking us off. I know that this is going to be a great episode and another great season. One of the ways I always like to start things off is getting your definition for success. How do you personally define it?
That's a really good question. If you would have asked me probably 5 years ago,
Uh
I would have been, corporate ladder, bags of money. Still maybe some bags of money now.
Yeah.
But now that I'm a mom to two little boys and a third on the way, I think that
Yes.
really looks different for me. And not
Mhm.
only being able to obviously provide for your family, but to really make a bigger impact.
Yeah.
And so success for me looks like them seeing mom follow
Mhm.
her dreams, her ambitions, being able to provide for them a life that I didn't have growing up with a single mom.
Yeah.
And then obviously being able to make an impact with my clients so they can make an impact in their own.
I love that. And you are doing phenomenal work. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on here. We're going to be talking about how to master discovery calls, excuse me, how to master discovery calls and to close more sales. And I know that that's something that a lot of coaches, a lot of agency owners have the desire to do.
Mhm.
But before we even get into that, I just want to know a little bit about your story. How did you get into sales?
Yeah, well, that's a how long do we have?
We
You
got a
know,
little bit of time.
yeah, that's an interesting story because I'm one of those people who is not your typical salesperson, sales
Mhm.
expert,
Okay.
and that I don't fit the profile. So,
Mhm.
straight out of college, I had my dream job that I thought that I wanted. Got to like
Mhm.
the third interview, didn't get the job. So
Mhm.
I was scrambling and I came
Mhm.
across this job where it was a part-time marketing intern for this company. I didn't really know exactly what they did, but I'm like,
Mhm.
part-time work, I can still, interview. And so
Right.
I ended up taking the job and it turns out to be a sales training company and not just a sales
Mm.
training company, a franchise of the largest sales training company in the world. Right. And
Wow.
so, yeah. Right, so I started working there, and what I thought was going to be a temporary job turned into a decade. Right, so I was
Mm.
there for 10 years. Went from marketing intern to director of marketing
Okay.
to when I left, I was managing partner and was in
Wow.
talks with the CEO to buy the franchise. And so I never anticipated or had any interest in being in sales. I wanted to be behind the scenes
Yeah.
and like many people, right, I had
Mhm.
these preconceived notions about what selling is, and
Mhm.
none of them were positive. And
Mhm.
so one of the things that I had learned in my experience there is that that sales really is more of a process. Whereas I
Mhm.
always thought it was about personality and being extroverted and being sneaky and manipulative, right? So
Mhm.
none of those things are things that describe me. And so
Right.
what it really taught me is that yes, there are people who take that approach to selling, but that's
Mhm.
really old school.
Yeah.
And there really is a process to selling, and introverts surprisingly are really good at sales, even though they don't think they can do it. So
Oh man,
that's how I
that
got
that's
to.
encouraging. I'm sure that's encouraging for all of the introverts out there.
I always tell
Definitely.
people introverts, they're ninjas, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't want to do all the talking. So all of the things that introverts are naturally good at actually work very well in selling, especially in modern sales.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'm just curious. So, like, over time, did sales develop as a passion of yours, or has it just been a skill that you've continued to hone and develop over time?
Oh, you are coming with a question, right? That's a really, really good question, right? And you know what? And the reason I say it's a really good question is because
Mhm.
when I left corporate back in 2018, so
Mhm.
I was on the path to buy the franchise, and we got to the point where I just knew, really, with there was a moment that happened with my son where I was traveling 2 to 3 weeks out of the month. And
Mhm.
my oldest was 2 at the time, and it got to the point where when he would see a plane, he would say, "There's mommy."
Wow.
And I knew, and one time it happened when I was in the car. My husband's like, "Yeah, he
Mm.
says that." And I knew, okay, I'm doing too much. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I left corporate to start my own thing, I asked myself that very question, like,
Mm-hmm.
is this something I'm just good at?
Mm-hmm.
Or is this something that I'm passionate about? And I think it's really both.
Okay.
I know how I know how sales has changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a skill that when you know how to sell, it doesn't matter what you're selling.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never be broke, right?
Right.
And that's kind of important. And so now I have developed this passion for really teaching other people how to sell, and not just sell, but sell with integrity,
Right.
sell with in a way that fits their personality and their
Mm-hmm.
style. Because there's so many people who are starting businesses, right? You know this, right? But most
Yeah.
businesses fail in the first 5 years, most generally in the first two. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not because they don't have expertise. It's not because they don't have experience. It's usually because of marketing and sales.
Yeah.
And so my passion is more so helping people fulfill their dreams. And the way that I do that is through my skill of teaching them how to
I love that. Yo, it's perfect synergy, right?
sell.
It
Yep.
all connects. And with that in mind, like that passion that you have for helping people, that's exactly what we're on a mission to do today, right? When you think about coaches, when you think about agency owners, one of the things that many of them have to do is hop on discovery calls. But
Uh-huh.
for many of them, it is a challenge to the point that you mentioned before. Either they lack that expertise or that understanding of what sales is and what it isn't. So I would love to get your take. Why do you feel like some or many coaches tend to struggle with discovery calls?
Yeah, I would say let me count the ways, right? It's a number of things. I think a lot of people, they have, going back to what you just asked me about the
Hmm.
passion and skills, they have the passion for what it is that they do, right? They're good
Hmm.
practitioners, they're experts at what they do. But when it comes to selling what they do,
Hmm.
that's where there's this disconnect. I think
Hmm.
there's also like this overall negative perception when it comes
Hmm.
to selling. We've
Hmm.
all been on the receiving end where we were buying something and we just didn't like the
Right.
experience.
Right.
And so I think there's this inherent fear of like, I don't want to make somebody else feel that way. I don't want to come
Hmm.
off slick and sleazy and all of these negative things. And we don't have a lot of examples of what the opposite looks like.
Right.
And so then people skew all the way to the other side, which is also counterproductive,
Hmm.
and actually like converting people. And then I think the other thing is that it's just not a skill that people have. I
Right.
know before learning how to sell, I thought
Hmm.
that like you're just good at selling, right? It's just part of
Yeah.
your personality. I didn't look at it as a skill that I could
Mm.
develop, and I think a
Okay.
lot of people don't look at it that way either. Because I'll hear,
Hmm.
"I'm not good at sales." So
Yeah.
what you're saying is you haven't learned how to sell.
Right.
You're like,
Right.
what you mean? Selling is a skill, like
Hmm.
other skill that you have to learn in your business. And I think it's one that's scary for people. And so
Hmm.
they tend to fix it last and they think all their problems are on the marketing side when they're often on the sales side.
Right. Right. Man. And when you look at the clients that you work with, have you identified maybe one or two things that people tend to struggle with the most?
Yeah. I think, and I know this is like a buzzword, right? When we talk about
Hmm.
mindset, but it truly is mindset.
Mm.
And not just mindset in general. I find that
Okay.
there's four different areas that people struggle the most. Is
Hmm.
one, their beliefs about themselves, right? So
Hmm.
the, I'm not a salesperson. I can't charge this, like all of the stuff that people have in their head.
Yeah.
Mindset around money,
Right.
right? Thinking that I can either make impact or income, and it's like no, you can actually do both, and
Yeah.
it's okay to get paid for the value that you create.
Right.
So I'm not a big believer in like charging what you're worth.
Hmm.
I'm a big believer in you charge for the value that you create.
Mm.
And
I
so
like
that
that.
changes and it creates this disconnect between like my personal worth and the worth and the pricing that I'm charging. And then the other kind of mindset roadblock I find that people have is
Hmm.
around their offer, right? They're not
Hmm.
confident in their offer and they're looking at what everybody else is doing and what everybody else is charging, and it just creates all of this self doubt and this feeling of
Right.
imposter syndrome. And then the other big area I would say is around just pricing in general and talking about
Mm.
money.
Hmm.
And most of our culture and in most of our homes, money was a taboo subject. Like at my
Yeah.
house, we never had enough of it, right? So there was nothing to talk
Yeah.
about. Right?
That's real.
I know when I went into corporate training, and now I'm
Hmm.
talking to the CEO, and I'm selling a $50,000 deal, and I'm like,
Hmm.
that is more than my salary for the year. Right?
Wow.
I had to learn how to get very confident in talking about that, and I was closing
Mhm.
$50,000 deals at 21, 22 years old.
Yeah.
And so those would be some of the big things that I think is just
Hmm.
all around the mindset piece.
Hmm.
And then the second thing I would say is having a process.
Hmm. Yeah.
I do a lot of sales call audits, and this is where I
Okay.
actually listen to client calls,
Hmm.
and the calls are all over the place.
Hmm.
And they're letting the prospect lead the conversation because they don't want to be salesy,
Right.
but they don't realize that the prospect actually wants that person to be confident
Hmm.
and teach them how to buy what it is that they're interested in. And so the
Hmm.
more that they're letting the prospect lead the conversation, the less credible they actually come across to the prospect.
Mm.
So selling
Yeah.
there's a lot of, it's very counterintuitive when it comes to being effective at
Oh man, that's good. Yo, those right there are heavy. Get your mindset together, and
selling. Get
then
your
be in a
mindset.
position where you have a process. Yeah,
Yeah.
like,
I say you got to get your mindset together before you can try to get your money together. Right?
mm,
And I was to say personality doesn't scale. Right? There's
right,
certain people who will buy from you because it's like, oh, I like Jay Immanuel. That's cool. But the majority of people, the
yeah,
majority of people are gonna be like, I like you, but right, there
right,
has to also be
right.
value there. So personality doesn't scale, processes do.
Oh man, that's key right there. That's key. And as you know, like the ultimate goal for getting somebody on a discovery call is to ultimately close them, to get a sale. What would you
Mm-hmm.
say are some of the mistakes that need to be avoided by coaches and agency owners when they're on those discovery calls?
Yeah, so I'm gonna change it a little bit because my perspective is a little bit different. I think
Okay.
converting is the secondary goal,
Okay.
right? So
Okay.
the first goal is to really qualify and determine mutual fit. Right? So
Okay.
oftentimes when I'm listening to calls, their mindset is, I do want to convert. And as I'm
Mhm.
listening, I'm like, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag, right? And so
Mhm.
what I'm teaching my clients is the first goal is to actually connect with people. Right? The
Mm.
first is
Okay.
that I've got to connect and I've got to build genuine rapport with you. And the only way that I can do that is by disconnecting from the outcome. And that's
Mm.
surprising when I tell people that because they're like, no, I hired you to teach me how to convert. We'll get there. But
Yeah.
if you can't connect with people, you'll never be able to convert, right? And then
Mhm.
the second
Mhm.
goal, this is kind of the four-step process that I teach.
Okay.
First is connect. The second is to qualify. And this is really, really important.
Mhm.
I always tell my clients, you taking on a client is more risky for you as the business owner than it is for the person that hired you.
Mm.
And the reason I believe that is we've all had a client where we knew we shouldn't have took their money. We knew we're like, I don't think
Right.
they're a good fit. We had red flags, but we had mortgage to
Yeah.
pay, right?
Right.
And it turns out to be a nightmare. And when we have
Mhm.
that nightmare client, we don't go tell other people like, oh, I worked with such and such as my client, and it will. What your client will do that. And so
Yes.
for me, I'm very particular about who I work with. So my job
Mhm.
on a discovery call, my goal is I'm
Mhm.
qualifying people just as much as they're qualifying me. And there
Okay.
have been times where I said, hey, you know what? I actually don't think I'm the best fit for you. I actually think you
Mhm.
need to do steps one, two, and three before we could ever work together. I actually think such and such has a better program for you
Mhm.
because I know I'm not about to put my business on the line at risk for
Right.
a couple of dollars, right? Excuse me. And so the third goal is to actually qualify. Once we qualify,
Mhm.
then the goal is to convert.
Okay.
But if we can't connect, we can't qualify, we can't, then converting just isn't going to happen.
Right.
Now, your question about mistakes is, and I just didn't
Mhm.
talk too much. Well, I would say the biggest mistake is not having a process, which is why
Mhm.
people end up talking too much. The second mistake is feeling like I have to sell you or convince you. And the way that we actually show our credibility and our expertise is not by talking at people. It's in
Mm.
the quality of questions that we ask.
Okay.
So when I'm listening to clients' calls, the questions that they're asking are usually irrelevant
Mm-hmm.
and they don't actually get to what's the gap that people are facing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third biggest mistake I would say is not closing the call.
Mm.
Um, and so that means we had great conversation, we went back and
Yeah.
forth, and then the call's like, okay. And the reason that happens is because people say, I want to be pushy.
Right.
It's not being pushy. It's about helping people make a decision. It's about
Mhm.
respecting both of our times, and it's all also about setting clear expectations at the beginning of the call as to
Mhm.
what was going to be happening and why we're having a conversation to begin
Right.
with. So there has to be a close. I do not have time to follow up
Right.
and
That's real. That is so real.
it's none of your business. If you want my help, great.
Mhm.
This is what it looks like. This is the investment. This is the process. If you don't want my help and you want to keep your problem, go
Mhm.
ahead.
Right. I hear
By
that.
all means, keep your problem.
Yeah. Oh man, that's real. And you touched on something that I know a lot of people who are new to sales, they question, which is not wanting to be pushy. And I actually
Yeah,
believe that there's like two ends of that spectrum. You know, people either look at the extreme of I don't want to be pushy, or they look
yeah,
at the extreme of I don't want to be needy. So
yeah,
like what can they do when they're on these discovery calls to, not be either of those, but kind of stay in that balanced middle
yeah.
road?
I think the first thing is the mindset that you have when you get on the call. Right.
Hmm.
So if I get on a call or your listener gets on a call and they've got desperate energy, nobody wants to work with somebody who needs their business.
No. No.
Right. And so I always say confidence is contagious. And
Mhm,
and the energy that you bring on to the call is also contagious. So if I get on
mhm.
a call and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to pay my bills, I need to do this, I need this, I'm not going to be effective on that call. And not only that, the prospect is going to sense like, I like her, but something was off, right? Like
Yeah.
something just doesn't resonate. So one is like really getting your mindset right and disconnecting from the outcome
Mhm,
of getting the sale is important. But on the pushy versus needy spectrum, I think
mhm,
what eliminates the this fear of being pushy is setting clear expectations.
mm,
Right. So what I mean by this is I was talking to a coach. She teaches people how to create courses,
mhm,
and she was calling her discovery calls like she had this cute little name like six-figure course launch strategy call.
mhm.
But then it's like my expectation as a prospect is going to be completely different when you're talking about a strategy call
Mhm.
versus I'm getting on and I know it's a discovery call for your program that's going to teach me how to create a six-figure course.
Right.
And so I think there's often a disconnect between the expectation that we're setting for the call
Mhm.
and what we're hoping happens. So in her case, what was happening is she was calling it the strategy call, was booking ton of appointments. But then people get on and they're like, okay, I'm ready to say no. Where's the six-figure strategy? And she's like,
Yeah.
oh, you learned that in my program. And it's like, nah, that's, we call that bait and switch, right? And I
Yeah. Yeah.
you would be far better off just calling it a discovery call and letting people know this call is designed for you to figure out if my six-figure course launch program is the best fit for you. Yes, you
Right.
will get less calls, but those calls will be more qualified because you all are on the same page as to what's going to be happening. So the expectation we set before the call and the expectation that we set at the beginning of the call is critical because now I don't have to be pushy. You know, we're on the call to see if you're a good fit and see if I'm
Mhm.
a good fit for you. You know that if we determine it's a good fit, then you're going to pay a deposit. We
Right.
know that if we determine that we're not a good fit for each other, we're going to say, it's just nice meeting you. And we can be
Yeah.
friends on social media.
Right.
Cool. Email. That's fine.
Yeah.
Um, but then I don't have to be pushy
Right.
because I've been clear about my expectations.
Hmm. That's good. And it kind of makes me go back to something that you mentioned before about shifting the goal of the call from the outcome, which is, converting. What would you say are, either one or, a couple of healthy goals to go into that call with, as the coach or as the agency owner?
Yeah. So one, I think my initial goal is, like I said, to connect. Second is to
Mhm.
qualify, and
Okay.
if we meet certain expectations, then
Hmm.
presenting the opportunity.
Hmm.
The other thing, and the other big mistake that I think people make, which makes discovery calls so uncomfortable
Hmm.
and challenging for people, is is how they start the call off.
Okay.
Meaning, when I book the appointment with you, I should
Hmm.
be clear about what the appointment is about. But
Hmm.
you also need to be asking some pre-qualifying questions so
Hmm.
that you can be more prepared for the call.
Okay.
And there are times where people will fill out my bill and I'll read it and I'm like, I
Hmm.
already know we're not gonna be a good fit.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you back 30 minutes of your life. I'm
Yes.
gonna give back me, give back 30 minutes of my life and say, hey, I saw that you completed this, and based on what you said,
Hmm.
I don't think that this particular program is the best fit.
Yeah.
Here's my recommendation. So a lot of what makes discovery calls effective is the work that you do at the beginning of the process.
Okay.
And I always tell people the amount of work and energy you have to put on the back end,
Hmm.
meaning trying to get a deal to close, trying to
Hmm.
convince people, all of this stuff is 100% correlated to the work you didn't do on the front end.
Mm.
I rather do the work on the front end,
Hmm.
pre-qualifying you, building the connection, setting clear expectations for the call, so we
Hmm.
both know what's going to happen, than trying to twist your arm at the end.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't have time for that. I don't have
Not
time
as
to
well.
convince grown people about fixing their problems, right? Like,
Right.
I'm just for real. And so the more that we can set those clear expectations, the
Mhm.
easier it is to be more effective on the call.
Okay. And I appreciate you for clarifying that. Like I was following you when you were kind of taking us through the process of what to be doing on the call, like you mentioned, making the connection and then qualifying and then focusing in on the conversion piece. I didn't equate that to that being the goal as opposed to the outcome just being the converting. So like I really appreciate that clarification. But it creates another question. I totally understand like the qualification piece of it is
Mm-hmm.
is pretty much determining whether or not this person is a good fit for me as the coach or as the agency owner. But when
Uh-huh.
you talk about the connection piece, are you talking about just kind of building rapport with people, getting them kind of comfortable with you, or is there something deeper or something else when it comes to like making that
Yeah.
connection?
Great question. So it's twofold.
Okay.
When we're building connections with people, that's really where we're building rapport.
Hmm.
One, but then two, setting expectations for the call. Right.
Okay.
So the connection
Hmm.
piece usually happens in that first 2 to 3 minutes. Right.
Hmm.
So I teach clients like, hey, here's what you need to get accomplished in the first 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay.
And the reason that this is so important is when I'm a prospect, and I've had this happen recently, where I
Hmm.
was interviewing some instructional designers, and I knew in the first 2 minutes we weren't going to be a good fit.
Hmm.
Like, and as the call progressed, and it was a much
Hmm.
shorter call with her than it was with the other people that I interviewed,
Hmm.
it wasn't because she didn't have the experience. She
Hmm.
actually asked the best questions. She had the best portfolio, but
Hmm.
there was no rapport there.
Hmm.
And it was
Okay.
something off putting that I said, do I really want to have weekly check ins with this person?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Right. So it isn't just always about expertise and the results that you can get. It is also about, are we a good fit for each other?
Hmm.
And knowing someone's style. And like, I know when I'm a client, I need a boot camp instructor. Right.
Yeah.
There's one more. I
Yeah.
don't need a cheerleader.
Yeah.
And there's other people who they need the cheerleader. They can't handle the boot camp instructor, but they
Hmm.
both can get you results.
Yeah.
Right. And so connection is really twofold: rapport as well as setting expectations.
Nah, that's good. That's good. And kind of going back to the fact that sales is a skill, and there may be some coaches and some agency owners watching, and they're like, "Yo, like I struggle with it. I'm not good at it." What would you
Uh-huh.
say is a good place for them to start to improve on their skill of selling?
I would say the first thing, and I mean, obviously, you can read books and listen to podcasts and things like that. But the other thing that I think is more valuable than that is their own call. Right. So
Hmm.
I find that most people don't record their sales calls and they're leaving
Hmm.
tons of money on the table. Right.
Okay.
And the reason why is there's often this disconnect. Like, I'll have a client that shoots me an email and says, hey, L'Oreal, can you listen to this call? And they're like, tell me what they think happened on the call.
Hmm.
Then I'll go back and listen to it. And their recollection of the call and what I actually heard on the call are two completely different things.
Hmm.
And so, and the reason why is when they're on that call, they're emotionally involved. And
Hmm.
then when I listen to the call, I'm not emotionally involved. I'm
Yeah.
objective about it. So I'm like,
Hmm.
hey, here's where we missed out on a ton of opportunity, right? So I'll give you a quick example. I had a
Okay.
client send me this email and she's like, hey, can you listen to this call? The prospect took over the conversation and I did get a chance. And I listened to it. I'm like, no, you just never took control. And
Hmm.
so because you didn't take control, they took control, but she didn't
Yeah.
see it. And so I would say the best place to start is start recording your call.
Okay.
Number one. Number
Hmm.
two is start listening back to your call. And there's
Okay.
three questions I teach my clients to ask: what worked on
Hmm.
that call, what didn't work, and then what do I need to do differently?
Okay.
I guarantee you,
Hmm.
even if you don't work with me, you're going to start closing more sales. And the
Yeah.
reason is you're going to start noticing patterns. Right? So I had another client who recorded her calls, but she never listened to
Hmm.
them. And so
Mm.
she sent me a call to listen to, but before she sent it, she listened to it herself. And she said,
Hmm.
actually, in just listening to the call, I figured out where I messed up.
Mm.
Boom. There is
Yeah.
so much about, and this is even if you don't consider yourself a salesperson. There's so
Hmm.
much value in listening back to your calls because you will start to recognize, like, oh, the reason they did this is because I
Hmm.
did
Right.
the reason they said this is, oh, I should have asked this question instead of that question. Oh,
Hmm.
I didn't even catch that they said that on there. That was like a red flag, and I knew they didn't have no money, right?
Yeah.
What I should have changed my application or change my booking appointment because if I would have asked this question, I wouldn't have spent 30 minutes with this person because I could have disqualified them much sooner, right? And
Hmm.
so there's so much value in the calls you're already doing,
Hmm.
whether you work with a sales coach or do any other kind of professional development.
Nah, that's super helpful. Extremely helpful for everybody who's out there listening because a lot of people are on these calls, but I'm sure that many of them aren't recording them. And if they are recording them, they're not going back and listening to them and seeing what they can learn from them. And I'm sure the question will probably come up for some of our viewers, which is, like, how do I record the call? Like, will they let me? Like, what would you say to somebody that has that question?
Uh, I have my answer. I just wanted to give you immediately, and then
Right, right.
I would tell you the fear that we have that people won't let us record the call is more in our head,
Hmm.
right? And than in reality. There has been only, and I haven't experienced this for myself, and I've been doing this 13 years,
Hmm.
but I've only had one client where the person asked the call not to be recorded. And this was a
Hmm.
corporate client, and they sell to big pharma,
Hmm.
pharmaceutical companies, and they were
Hmm.
talking about some proprietary medicine that was being developed, and they didn't have an NDA in place.
Okay.
That is one out of 13 years where I've
Hmm.
heard someone say we can't have the call recorded. So that fear that
Right.
we have is just not true. So an easy
Hmm.
way to fix that is one, you can put it on your calendar booking system, like our call will be recorded. Number
Hmm.
two, if you and I were meeting, before you hop on, it's already recorded, right? And
Yeah.
so when you hop on, it just says, hey, accept this meeting is being recorded. And then
Hmm.
in the event that a client or prospect really says, hey, I prefer this not to be recorded, don't record it,
Hmm.
but still
Hmm.
ask yourself those debriefing questions. What worked, what didn't work, and what would I do differently?
Okay. That's good. That's good. Yeah. So you have dropped so many gems. I kind of want to quickly highlight for our audience, right? So the first thing that you were talking about is the importance of tackling the mindset, especially for people who feel like they aren't good at sales, they don't have that experience, really just tapping into that mindset first. And then you also talked about the process that we need to have in place. Like if you don't have a sales process, then you're gonna be
Yeah.
in trouble. And then once you're actually on the discovery call, recognizing that the goal shouldn't be just to get the sale or to convert, but first to connect, to qualify, and then focus in on conversion. Now,
Yeah.
I would say you dropped a lot of gems on us. Are there any other things that you feel like people need to know that's required in order to master their discovery calls that you haven't already touched?
Yeah, I would say one of the common questions I get becomes very technical, like, how long should my discovery calls be?
Mm,
Should I charge for my discovery calls? And
mhm.
oftentimes people are asking themselves the wrong questions, right?
Okay.
Because when it comes to time for your discovery calls, it really depends on how much information your prospect already has about your offer will determine the amount of time you actually need. Right. So
Okay.
like in my case, I work with a lot of corporate clients where I'm training their sales team. Those
Hmm.
calls are an hour long, right?
Okay.
We can't have a 15-minute call, right?
Right.
But then I also have programs where it's more focused on helping entrepreneurs sell, and it is a group coaching program, and it is a very defined program with a sales page. Okay, I don't need to talk to you for an hour about it, right?
Mhm.
Because most of
Right.
the information has already been shared. And so you want to be thinking about who am I selling to? What is it that
Mhm.
I'm selling? And how much information does the person have about my offer beforehand to
Mhm.
determine the appropriate amount of time that you need. And then just to add one more piece of clarification around like the goals and outcomes of the discovery call, remembering
Mhm.
that the goal is connect and to qualify, the outcome is converting.
Yeah.
And so, but when we do the other steps right, the conversion naturally happens.
Mhm.
And then other thing that I would say is really tracking your numbers.
Okay.
This is another big gap when I am coaching clients, particularly entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
and we're looking at the data.
Mhm.
They don't have any data. And I'd be like, so
Mm.
how many calls did you book last month? And they're like, I think, well, okay. How many of those, right? And so there's certain metrics that people should be tracking to be able
Okay.
to figure out where the gap is.
Yeah.
And what I mean by the gap is that are we even getting the right people? Right? It
Mhm.
makes no sense to convert the wrong people.
Right.
Are we getting the right people, but then they're not showing up to their appointment, right? So
Mhm.
we track like show up rate. So we track
Mhm.
how many appointments are you actually booking, discovery calls.
Mhm.
Of those discovery calls, how many of those people are actually showing up,
Right.
right? Because the gap, maybe you're converting fine. You need more of
Mhm.
those people to actually show up. So where's the gap happening there? Of those people who show up, how many of them actually fit your ideal client profile? So I had
Mhm.
this happen with a client where she had a booking a good amount of calls,
Mhm.
had a really good show up rate, but her
Mhm.
conversions were off. And
Mm.
her conversions were off. I said, well, of those people that you met with, how many actually fit your client profile? And then how many did not? Of the
Yeah.
people who fit her client profile, her conversion was really high.
Mm.
But the people that were not fitting her ideal client profile were
Yeah.
dragging the number down. And I said, so before you try to book more calls, let's go tighten up your application
Right.
to eliminate some of those people. And her conversion rate overall went up. And she wasn't spending time with the wrong people,
That's good. That's
right?
good.
And so there's kind of some metrics that you need to be looking at to figure out, okay, where is the gap actually occurring? It isn't just on
Mhm.
conversion. Conversions is the outcome, is usually further up in the process where things are going
Nah, that's good. Yeah. Once again, you just keep dropping the gems, and I'm absolutely loving it. And I feel like there's one other piece of that puzzle that people probably have questions about, which is okay, like I made it through the connection phase, I
left.
made it through the qualification phase. Now I'm in the convert phase. What things do
Yeah.
I need to know, L'Ariel, so that I can actually, convert and get that positive outcome?
Yeah. Well, if we did the other two pieces, converting really becomes easy.
Mm-hmm.
So conversion is all about connecting your offer back to the things that they share with you in the qualify phase. So
Okay.
oftentimes what happens is people try to convert too soon. So they
Mm,
present their solution before there's a gap, right?
okay.
So your solution, your offer, whether it's a coaching program, whether it's consulting, whether it's speaking, whether it's group coaching, whatever it is, it needs to fill a gap. And if I
Mm-hmm.
try to present the solution before I identify the gap, your price will always be too much,
Okay.
right? And so when
Mm-hmm.
we're converting, it really is recapping what they've shared with you, showing how what you do in your program or your process will solve those problems. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it goes back to setting expectation at the beginning of the call. When I'm
Yeah.
meeting with someone, they know at the end, we're not going to be like, hey, that was cool. At the
Yeah.
end, we're going to be like, yes or no.
Right.
I'm
Decision
okay with
time.
either one, right? I'm really okay with either one, right?
Yes.
And so when we get to the end, it's not like there's some secret of like, oh, okay, she about to try to close me. No, it's just like, hey, I know that we talked about this and that. This is what you
Mm-hmm.
shared. This is what we do. This is how and why. What do
Mm-hmm.
you want to do moving forward,
Right. Nah, I
right?
love that.
Right. And so the other piece of feedback that I would give your
Mhm.
audience is around pricing, right?
Okay.
Because I'll hear this once we get to presenting our offer, and people will say their pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And you should just say your pricing and be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And most people will say their price, and then they're like, right? And they're
Yeah.
trying to create value on the back end. Once you set your price, like the moment to create value and
Hmm.
show your expertise is before you set your price, not after.
Yeah.
Because
That's.
now, if I'm talking about it after, now I'm trying to justify my pricing, and I
Hmm.
actually lose credibility. So
Mm.
I don't do discounts. I don't
Hmm.
do well. Normally we do. No, the price is the price is the price.
Yes.
And I don't justify my price. And if
Hmm.
it's outside of your budget, that's fine. That's
Yeah.
fine. If I'm doing corporate work, obviously I can scope it down. But if
Hmm.
it's a set price, it's the price. And if it's not a good fit for you now, that's perfectly okay. But I don't get off that call like maybe I should change my price, which
Right.
is what I see a lot of people doing, right?
Hmm.
Because a couple of people who are probably not the ideal client said
Right.
they couldn't afford it. We're like, well, maybe I need to change it. No,
Yeah.
maybe you need to change your audience, but it's
Right.
likely that you don't need to change your offer.
That's real. That's real. Oh man, yo, you have dropped absolutely so many gems. I know I've been collecting them. I hope our viewers have been collecting them as well. And one other thing that I wanted to talk to you about today, which is right in line with what we do over here with Why We Succeed, right? You know, increasing the sales as well as increasing the audience, right? Because as your audience grows, essentially, if you present the right offer to them, your sales should be able to grow too. And
Yeah.
we like to focus in on email, video, and podcasts as mediums of being able to attract the right audience. And I'm curious, for your business, have you used any of those three to bring in more sales for you?
Yeah. D, all the above.
Yeah. And I love that. I love it. She like, yo, we doing all of that. And with that in mind, which of the three have you found the most success with?
um, it depends on the audience, right? So I
Okay.
serve both entrepreneurs and I serve
Hmm.
corporate clients.
Okay.
So for entrepreneurs, it's mainly through email and building my email list and podcast. Although I've
Hmm.
actually booked one of, I would say email for entrepreneurs and more
Hmm.
podcasts and actually speaking for corporate.
Okay.
Like I did a podcast interview, booked a speaking engagement with the National Association. From there, booked three additional paid speaking engagements, but it all started from like one podcast that I did, and it was just
Wow.
sharing my story. Right, so
Yeah.
podcast interviews have been very effective in booking corporate speaking
Hmm.
opportunities for me, whereas email tends to work very well for my entrepreneur.
I love that. And out of curiosity, do you have a favorite when it comes to those?
I don't know if you noticed, but I like to talk.
Yeah.
I think video in general, which we're really pushing to do more of that, and
Hmm.
podcasts work really well because they're able to capture your personality in a way
Right.
that is more challenging to do in email.
Hmm.
And so I would say probably podcasts.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I like that. And I'm curious, are there any specific strategies that you used in either one or, multiple that you found to really work to bring in more sales for your business?
Yeah, I would say particularly on the podcast side,
Hmm.
I think we have this fear of sharing too much information.
Mm, yeah.
Um, and so it's like we want to gatekeep stuff, or we want to
Hmm.
like, in my program. And I'm a firm believer that when you give people value,
Hmm.
when we're doing a podcast like this, right, there's going to
Hmm.
be certain things that people can run with and implement. Fantastic.
Right.
But if you don't have anything deeper than what you can share in a 30 to 60-minute podcast, and that's the problem
Yeah.
with what you have to offer, right? So my big
Hmm.
belief is give value, pique
Hmm.
people's interest, solve some of
Hmm.
those initial problems, and then people will loop back around. And the other
Yeah.
thing, and this is from some of the people that have booked me corporately from podcast interviews,
Hmm.
is they said I connected to your story,
Mm.
right? And
Okay.
I think sometimes we forget to share the
Hmm.
story, or we only want to share the highlights.
Hmm.
But people really connect to where you were and that kind of pivot point
Yeah.
that got you to where you are, because they're
Mm.
probably where you are and trying
Yeah.
to figure out that pivot point. So not being scared to share. Actually, the story where I talk about me being in the airplane and
Hmm.
crying all the way back to work after when I had to go back to
Mm-hmm.
maternity leave after having my first son.
Mm-hmm.
That has been referenced in like 3 corporate speaking engagements that I have booked.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And they were the audience was women, and they said, when
Mm-hmm.
you said this, and it has always been this story,
Yeah.
I knew that our employees would resonate with it.
Okay.
And so being able to share some of those vulnerable moments, I think, is key, and not just for a strategic purpose, but to
Mm-hmm.
actually create connections so that people can see themselves in your story.
Yeah, that's important. And it's good to know that, you're implementing all three of those. A lot of people aren't. And, it's definitely beneficial when you have those in place. And I know some people tend to struggle when it comes to, like they have an email list, but they struggle with building that email list. What strategies have you found work for getting people on your list? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say leverage the other two, right? So, for
Hmm.
example, doing this podcast, leverage that to build your email list. If you're doing
Yeah.
video, let's say on social media, on YouTube, on Instagram, whatever, leveraging that to be your build your email list. And then I quite honestly use a lot of speaking, right? Because if I'm
Hmm.
speaking in front of 100 people or 200 people virtually or in person, you leveraging that to build my email list has been really helpful.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yo, I love that. And one other question around that. I know some people try to do it all, right? They
Yeah.
try to wear all of the hats in the business. And I'm curious, is that something that you outsource? Is it something that you still personally manage yourself? What's your approach?
Yeah. I've definitely been some people, right? When you said some people,
That's fair.
it,
Yo, we all have at some point.
yeah, yeah, right. And there's some ebbs and flows.
Hmm.
Meaning I've had copywriters who write my emails,
Hmm.
um, and I've had mixed results from that.
Okay.
Now to the point where I've taken back over writing my own email because
Hmm.
having my voice and my story is important. Now I may get back to the point
Yeah.
where I want to outsource that. When it
Hmm.
comes to video, I outsource more of the editing side of things.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to booking podcasts, I have my virtual assistant where I'll say, okay, here's the podcast I really want to focus on, and then she'll do the
Hmm.
reach out.
I
And
love
then we
that. I
get
love
that
that.
whole process documented.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that, right? Like, because not only have you been personally involved in each of those, you also recognize what parts of those processes, right? Like, once again, you need a process for each of those as well. Which one of those
Absolutely.
parts of the process do I want to remove myself from and I'll rely on somebody else's expertise to handle? And that's key. That's key.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
my belief is like if I have someone that can do it better, faster, or cheaper than I can do it myself, then
Yeah.
I should probably be focused on things that I can't outsource to someone
Right.
else. So yeah,
That
there's
makes
definitely
sense.
elements that I hand off.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Wow, like this has been an amazing conversation. Before we go, I know you've talked a lot about how you've helped your clients, so I would love for you to share with our audience. How could you help them? What are some of the services that you offer that, in case they've been listening, they're like, "Yo, I want to
Yeah.
work with you."
Well, there's different levels that I work with clients. Typically, when I'm working with entrepreneurs,
Hmm.
it's in three different ways. One is
Okay.
just a self call audit, where they may
Hmm.
say, "Hey, I have some calls. Can you listen to them?" I put together a report. We go over it together, and they kind of like go off and try to implement it.
Hmm.
And then the second level is I have a master discovery call course.
Okay.
It's a self-paced program where I walk you step by step through the process of how to, go from capture to connect to qualify to convert. And
Hmm.
then the third level would be I have an accelerator where it's the same
Hmm.
content, but you get 6 weeks of coaching on the back end where I'm
Okay.
helping you navigate deals in real time so we can plan for upcoming calls that you have, we can debrief calls that you've had to say,
Wow.
okay, here's what we need to tweak. But those are from on the entrepreneur side, three of the main
Hmm.
ways to work.
I love that. And how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so obviously you can follow me on Instagram at a woman with vision. But I know we've also talked a lot about discovery calls, and I
Hmm.
do have a free discovery call playbook
Okay.
that people can download, and it talks about the 5 biggest mistakes that people make, as well as what changes you can make immediately, whether you work with
Hmm.
me or not, to improve your conversion. And so they can find that at l'areal lipkins.com, hit entrepreneur, and it'll be right there for them to download.
Perfect. I'm gonna definitely make sure that there is a link in the description so they can go and grab that. Yo, that's a perfect place to start. And L'Ariel, I have truly enjoyed our conversation. Before we wrap up, just want to hand the mic over to you. Are there any questions that you like to ask me, or any last or closing words you want to leave our viewers with?
I don't think I have any. I don't think I have any questions. I've probably hit my my limit of talking talking too much. The thought that I would leave people with is that you will never be good at something that you think is bad. So if you think selling is bad, if you think charging for the value that you create is bad, if you feel like talking and promoting your offers is bad, you'll never be good. And when you have a business, you have a responsibility, especially if you have a business that changes people's lives and changes people's business, you have a responsibility to let people know that help exists. Because there are people right now trying to Google how to solve the problem that you've already mastered.
Right.
And so you have a responsibility to let them know that help exists. Be confident in what it is that you're selling. Be confident in what it is that you're promoting. And know that selling is really just giving people the opportunity to solve their problem. That is it. Sales is a value exchange. And oftentimes I think we only think about what we get monetarily when we're selling, and we're not thinking about the payoff that our clients get and how their lives are impacted and their business are impacted. So with that said, I would say go out and go sell something, right?
I love that. Yo, go do it, right? Like Nike, just do it, baby. Oh man, I have absolutely enjoyed this conversation. Like, L'Ariel, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, being a guest. If you're ever interested in coming back, it would be an absolute pleasure and an honor. I truly appreciate you for everything that you share with us today. Thank you so much.
You are more than welcome.